Welcome to today's Bible study from College Lutheran Church, and from me, Pastor David Drebus. It's good for us to study God's Word, and we continue to do that using this list of the top 100 essential Bible passages. We come today to story number 41, Daniel in the Lion's Den, Daniel chapter 6. I hope you've read chapter 6 before starting this video. If you have read it, you may notice this story is very similar to the last story we read, which was also from the book of Daniel. That story was of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego being thrown into the fiery furnace for not giving King Nebuchadnezzar the proper homage. They refused to bow down to King Nebuchadnezzar. Today's story is quite similar. It's a different king, but we're still in Babylon, and we're still in the time of exile. And like Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, Daniel is within the court of King Darius. So even though he's a Jew, he is serving in the court of the Babylonian king, and he's doing quite well. And so some of the other ministers in the court of King Darius don't like that, and they conceive of a trap very similar to the trap for Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. I do find it interesting that Daniel's crime, if we would call it that, is slightly different from that of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego were ordered to bow down to a statue of King Nebuchadnezzar, and they did not. Daniel, the edict that gets him trapped is that no one should pay homage to anyone but King Darius, and Daniel continues to pray to his Lord. That's a little different because he's actively praying to the God of Israel, and that's what gets him, that's why he runs afoul of King Darius' order. So it's slightly different. Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego were punished for what they refused to do. Daniel is punished for what he continues to do, which is worship his Lord. Now, other than that, the stories are quite similar, and it's interesting to me that a lot of literary scholars, when they look at the Bible, they assume that what we have here are competing myths, that whoever put the book of Daniel together in the form that we have it now just sort of shoved both of these stories in because that author or that editor did not want to decide which one was true and which one to keep and which one to throw away. Now that's certainly possible. It's possible that what we have here is another iteration of the story of the fiery furnace, and over centuries the details changed before it was written down and put in the book of Daniel. But if this was done intentionally, I think it teaches us something very important that those literary scholars can sometimes miss. I don't know about you, but I find that it is true that the same problems come up generation after generation. The same sins keep getting committed again and again. And I think that's part of the point of having these multiple stories of followers of God having to stand up when their faith is tested. It's not a defect of the book that we have a repeated story. It's actually a feature. It's actually intentional that Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego have their faith tested, and just a little while later, Daniel has his faith tested in a very similar way. I think the message is that this is going to keep happening for those who are faithful to God. And it will even happen to you and to me at times. Our faith may be tested. Our loyalties may be tested. This is a recurring trouble. One moment that stands out to me is after this edict is issued that no one should pray to anyone but King Darius. We are told in verse 10, "When Daniel learnt that this decree had been issued, he went into his house, and there he knelt down 3 times a day and offered prayers and praises to his God as was his custom." I find that interesting that the first thing he does after hearing an order that no one in the land should pray to anyone but King Darius, Daniel says, well, I better pray about this. It reminds me of something Martin Luther is said to have said, which is, I have so much to do today, I must begin with prayer. I think sometimes we get caught up in our own to-do lists or caught up in the drama of the day that we forget to just begin with prayer. I hope this Bible study can be helpful to you with that we take time to do this first. Well, if you're familiar with this story, if you've read it already or heard it before or seen paintings of this story, it's a classic one. Daniel, of course, is thrown to the lions, but he survives because God shuts the mouths of the lions. That's a fantastic story of a miraculous delivery from danger. And I've always been struck ever since I read a commentary on the book of Daniel, what one scholar had to say about this, which is that one thing we learn from Daniel chapter 6 and from elsewhere in the Bible is that human oaths and human laws tend to bind. God's law is a law that frees. And this is another example of that. So Darius ends up bound by his own edict that is issued out of pride for himself. If you read the story, he doesn't want to send Daniel to the lion's den, but he feels that he must because he has said so. And by the end of the story, those advisors to Darius are thrown to the lions, and they're eaten up before they even hit the bottom of the pit. Part of the message there that this same scholar, a man named Towner, had to say was that this is a reminder that those who try to exploit the law often end up caught in its very jaws. So I think that's an important message for us to get from a fantastic story, a story familiar to many people, whether they've ever read the Bible or not. I think it's an important story for us to keep in mind. God's law is meant to free us, so that by following God's law we are free to serve our neighbors and to take care of each other, and we will lead healthy lives if we follow God's law. The human laws are meant to bind, and if we're not careful, we may even get caught up in those laws that we pass to try to keep other people in line. I think that's a message of hope and a message of warning for us this week. Peace be with you.